So why don't we jump in like we do every single Friday morning, and let's start our call with grateful. Who'd like to share? Who'd like to share something or someone they're grateful for? Go ahead and just raise your hand, and I'll be able to call on you. Alex.
I wanted to share that I'm grateful for Carter. He's my coach, and through this coaching journey that we've been on, he's not only coaching me, but he's coaching me and my fiance on an experiential life. And I know that is the whole point of joining this group is living experientially, and he is living that value out. So I'm so grateful for him.
Awesome. I love that. I love that. Thanks for sharing, Alex. Who else? Who else is grateful and like to share this morning? Katie.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to throw some gratitude towards Alexandra. True to form, sometimes I send her things last minute and the girl always delivers. So I'm super grateful for her and Dawn for helping us with the PowerPoint for today's class that you and I are doing. And then Morris has always got my back and really pluses everything that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, really our whole virtual partner team. So appreciate you guys so much. I don't tell you enough, so thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Katie. They are phenoms at what they do for sure, for sure. Who else is grateful this morning and wants to share? Who else is grateful? Go ahead and raise your hand. Oscar.
I'm grateful for Katie. I mean, she's always available for anything, any questions. She's always putting the best of herself in every single call, every coaching call. She's the best. It's just that.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing, Oscar. I think that's a pretty awesome description. She's always putting her best into every call or anything she does when she's with us. So I appreciate that greatly, Oscar. Thanks for sharing. How about one more grateful? Who else is grateful and doesn't want to miss the opportunity? John.
All right, this is for, we welcomed a brand new baby girl into the world yesterday for the PDX Property Group family. So just super grateful for Hannah. She's healthy, she's well. About 9:30 last night, she welcomed a brand new baby girl into the world. So we have a new team member. So just wanted to express some gratitude for that, and I'm just glad that everything went well.
Thanks for sharing. Congrats to Hannah. There's a group that was getting a play-by-play. Almost literally, but super excited to have another baby in the house in PDX and also as part of Place. I think there was one more hand. Dawn, was that you? Maybe you put your hand down. I didn't want to miss you. Let's see. You're gonna need to. Yeah, there you go. There's Dawn.
Hi everybody. I would like to thank Serena and Julia from Ben Kinney's team for leading those accounting calls this week. That is not a big, it is a big task for us to transfer over there. And those two seem like total rock stars, and Ross has been amazing with responding to everything. I also want to thank Joel and Heather and Kate for a really great ops call this week. We had a plan for the ops call, and at the last minute, we decided we need to talk about some other things. And the three of them just took it and ran with it. It was a really great call. So thank you guys for being awesome ops leaders.
Love it. Thank you, Dawn. Thanks for sharing as well. Let's talk about our values, guys. Let's shift and talk. Where did you see our values demonstrated? Anywhere across our network or companies? Any one of our values? Holly.
Hi, sorry, I had to unmute myself. I want to recognize Holly Northup for living our values. First of all, she begrudgingly took a vacation last week to live an experiential life, which is so important to us, but more importantly, just demonstrating growth over and over again. Even after yesterday's stand-up, she sent me a text like, mind blown, this spoke to me, this is where I need to work on this. But she continues to do that week over week, and it's making a difference for our entire organization. So thank you, Holly Northup.
I love that. And guys, if you're not on stand-ups, get on stand-ups, right? I got a bunch of texts yesterday about how valuable the stand-up was. to start their day, or depending on your time, and time differences, just sort of a break in that day to jump in and get some real clarity on what do we do today to move the needle. So love that. Thank you. Thanks for sharing, Holly. Awesome demonstration of our values. Let's see, Joel.
Hey, Chris. I actually
Hey, how
have
are you?
two. One is for, I guess, relationships and giving, and that's Zane and Brittany and Trisha and Geneva and Sam, who all gave up half a day of work last week to volunteer at the food bank and help create 8,745 meals in 3.5 hours with the other team for Central Texas families. So just really shows who we are as a company and them, really living the values. And then my other one is to Kristen and Carter and Heather and Kate. I keep most of my personal life pretty personal, and about 6 weeks ago, I got a call that my dad had coronavirus, and they were just really cool. They were the only people who really knew, and for 33 days, it was just up and down. We never knew what was going to happen, but they were just amazing and showed up, and it took our relationship from business and friendship to just a whole new level. So I'm grateful that we are in a organization that really promotes relationship beyond just our 1, 3, 5 and our business goals, and that I had these people around me and it's still ongoing, but for 33 days of not knowing what was going to be in hospital visits and all these things with my dad, that they were just there for me in every way. So I'm grateful for them, and they really showed up as they always do with our values.
I love that, Joel. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that, Joel. Appreciate that greatly. How about one more, and then we're going to jump in. Carter.
Hey, good morning, Chris. I just want to give a shout out for growth and opportunity to the partners that continue to attend Power Hour on a consistent basis. The cool thing is that virtually every single day in Power Hour, somebody sets an appointment. So it just is a really good testament to, I know you're going to be talking about time management and focus today, but when we have that time management and focus, great things can happen. So this week we've had 5 or 6 partners that have been there 3 or more days in the week. And so you guys know who you are. And so just acknowledging them for their dedication to themselves and their businesses to grow, and the opportunity for them to increase their business so that they can go out there to Alex's point and live an experiential life.
Awesome. Thank you, Carter. Thanks for sharing that. All right, guys, let's jump in. Let's jump in. What's today? What's the date?
June 12th.
It is. I look at June as sort of that midpoint, right? That midpoint of the year. Obviously, we have just a couple weeks left, and we will hit exactly dead on in the middle of the year. And as I was thinking about that, I shared this with a couple people maybe earlier in the week. I was reading Daniel Pink's book entitled When. And it's the subtitle of that book is The Science of Perfect Timing, I believe, is exactly what that subtitle is. And in that book, I came across some research that I thought was incredibly valuable for us today, where we are in our businesses. In 2012, Daniel Pink said that 5 scientists got together and they began reaching out to zookeepers all across the country. So these 5 scientists got together, they reached out to zookeepers, and they began to do some research in 3 different countries to help them better understand more than 500 different apes. So they asked those zookeepers to go into their pens, and they asked a question. Now those apes ranged in ages from babies to middle-aged apes to older adult apes, and they asked the zookeepers to rate the age or the ape's health and well-being. Right, so that was the metric, health and well-being. And then they matched that well-being, or what they called the happiness rating, to the ages of the apes. And guess what the results were? If you looked at that chart, or you looked at that graph, between age 0 to 10 their health and well-being peaked, right? So they saw that health and well-being peak at age 10, and then 11, 12, 14, 15, 17, 20, 24, 27, 30. It actually bottomed at age 30. And then it began to go back up, 35, 40, 45, 50. And at the end of their life, about 60, interestingly enough, their well-being peaked again. So they had a peak at the beginning of their life, and they had a peak at the end of their life, and they had this bottom in the middle of their life. You might say that there was this midlife crisis in apes, right? So this prompted some social scientists to get involved and to start some studies, guys. And these two social scientists who study how people pursue goals and follow personal standards began an experiment. So this is the second experiment, guys. So they performed a test on young adults. And they handed these young adults a stack of 5 cards. So picture you getting a stack of 5 index cards. And on the card was a shape. There was a shape drawn on that card. And it was the same shape on every single card. It was turned a little bit different, right? But it was the same shape. And they gave them scissors and those 5 cards. And they asked them to cut those shapes out as carefully as possible. And so the young adults did. Then lab workers were brought in. They weren't involved in the experiment, but they were brought in and asked to rate on a scale from 1 to 10 the cutting accuracy of those 5 shapes. They did the experiment with 5 shapes and 7 shapes and 10 shapes. And guess what? It didn't matter. The results were the same. The participants' scissor skills rose at the beginning, right? Those shapes were beautiful in the beginning. It rose at the end. They were beautiful at the end. And they were kind of messy in the middle, right? Their scissor skills slumped in the middle. So in the middle, when looking at performance standards, they found that participants were more likely to literally cut corners, right? Cut corners in the middle of the sequence, get faster, not pay attention to how well they performed. In the beginning, on it. At the end, on it. In the middle, not so much. So then another group of statisticians decided to do a study around sports. Halftime in sports, right? Halftime in sports represents this midpoint, a moment in time when activity stops, teams reassess and recalibrate. And this is what the study showed. At this midpoint, the trailing team, right, has to confront the reality that they are mathematically losing, right? Like the trailing team, right, mathematically they're losing. The other team just has more points. That means that if they matched the other team's performance in the second half, what happens? Well, it's a guaranteed loss, yes? So if they match, like if you're losing at halftime, simple math, this isn't a trick question, right? If you're losing at halftime and you match the other team's performance in the second half, well, it's a guaranteed loss. So a team ahead at halftime is more likely than its opponent to win the game, yes or no? That's not a trick question either. The answer to that is yes. They're more likely to win. It has little to do with motivation, has little to do, it's just probability. If you're winning at halftime, you're more likely to win the game. But two guys, John Berger over at the University of Pennsylvania and Devin Pope over at the University of Chicago analyzed more than 18,000 NBA games over I think it was 15 years. And teams ahead at halftime, well, they did. They won more games, right? That is to be expected. They won more games than the teams that were behind on halftime. But there was one exception, guys. Teams that were behind by just 1 point actually showed up as more likely to win. It was actually advantageous, greatly advantageous, to be down by 1 point at halftime. As they looked at scoring patterns, they found that the trailing teams scored a disproportionate number of their points immediately after the halftime break. Guys, what does that teach us? It's halftime. It's halftime. And many of us are trailing, right? Many of us may be trailing behind our goal. The cool thing is we're only competing against ourselves, right? So the probability of us winning is high because we're competing against ourselves. But it's halftime. And it's really, really important for us to take a step back and evaluate, like, why am I winning or why am I not winning, right? Where are we? And the question is why. So in the book, When, right, the science behind perfect timing, Daniel Pink shared 5 ways to reawaken motivation during a midpoint slump, right? If you think about that team that goes into the locker room and you need to reawaken your motivation, you're down by 1, what do? Here's the tactical, right, and scientific strategy to get back on track at midtime. Number 1, Daniel Pink says what they learned in those studies is we need to set interim goals. The reason why we oftentimes slump in June and July and sometimes August, right, is because we don't have interim goals. The goals that we set are too far away. The goals that we set are too long. So set interim goals. Break large projects or goals into smaller projects. Trick your mind into the middle, right? Trick your mind into being, you're just a month behind. Like, figure out what this month's goal is, not this quarter's goal is, not this year's goal is. Figure out what the week's goal is if you need to trick your mind into getting into the midterm. That's good for running as well, right? If you set out a goal to run 10 miles a week, well, gosh, just trick your mind into realizing that, gosh, my goal is 5 miles by Wednesday, right? My goal is 1 mile today. Number 2, publicly commit to those interim goals. I get it. We all have yearly goals, but publicly commit on stand up, during power hour, with your group, right? On your team, publicly commit to your interim goal. What is your goal this month? Number 3, and this is an interesting one, the phrase was stop your sentence midway. And this is where that came from. I've shared this before, but Ernest Hemingway, right, was one of the most prolific writers of all time, right? He published 15 books during his lifetime. And one of his favorite productivity techniques was to stop writing, not at the end of a chapter, not at the end of a paragraph, not even at the end of a sentence at the end of the day or when he was putting his pen down, but it was the middle of a sentence. He never ended his writing session unless it was in the middle of a sentence. And here's why: because the sense of incompletion lit a midpoint spark that helped him begin the following day with immediate momentum. Think about that. Think about your lead gen. I'm not saying don't finish your lead gen, but sometimes, right, we move towards this completion, right? I'm gonna knock off this list. Well, stopping midway through your activities is not the worst thing in the world for motivation to finish those activities the following day. There's actually a psychological effect called the Zeigarnik effect. And what that is it states that we have a tendency to remember unfinished tasks better than finished ones. They've done this with waiters and waitresses, right? Waiters and waitresses have a better tendency to remember your order in the middle of your meal than remembering your order once you finish and once you cash out. They don't remember what you ate, but they'll remember what you're eating. Why? It's a midterm effect. Interesting, right? Number four, for 5 ways to reawaken your motivation during a midpoint slump, number 4 is don't break the chain. Greatest example of this is Jerry Seinfeld, right? Many have heard the story that he made a habit of writing every single day, not just work days, not just Monday through Friday, every single day. He printed out a calendar with 365 boxes, and he would draw an X in that box every time he wrote, every time he wrote, every time he wrote. And he says he would build a chain, and he was unwilling to break the chain. Once that chain starts, it's interesting, we are less likely to break the chain. And number five, picture one person your work will help. In a slump, behind goal, picture one person your work will help. Now, I know most of you personally. And as I think of some of your faces in my head right now, your work will help you. Is that fair? Your work will help you. But interestingly enough, as human beings, that's not enough. That's not enough. Adam Grant, right? He's a Wharton professor. He's the author of, two of my favorite books that he wrote is Give and Take, right? And Originals. Originals is a phenomenal book. In Originals, I think that was the book that this was in. He said, I always ask myself, what am I doing that will benefit other people? Oh, that's simple, right? Number 4 was don't break the chain. But here's what Adam Grant says. The slump of how can I continue becomes how can I help? Some of us are in that slump, like, gosh, like, how do I get through this? How do I continue? You're not going to if that's your slump. But if your slump becomes how can I help? It changes that midpoint slump. Here's the deal. We did a social experiment. We did a statistical experiment, right? They did a scientific experiment, all showing midpoint slumps are real, guys. And yet, if we attack that midpoint, man, right? You're down by 1. You're down by 1. Statistically, you have a better shot. Like you are better to be down by 1 than be winning right now at the half point. True, right? 5 ways to reawaken motivation. Number 1, set interim goals. Number 2, publicly commit to those goals. Number 3, stop your sentence midway, right? Stop your day in the middle of something. You'll remember where you left off and you'll be more committed to picking up where you left off. Take a lesson from Ernest Hemingway, right? Number 4, don't break the chain. And number 5, picture someone your work will help. That's the pretty awesome thing about our industry. All of us are doing work that will help someone. Ahas from those 5, or maybe from these social experiments, scientific experiments of midpoints. Carter.
Yeah, when you put it into a sports context, I can remember in sports, and this is when we were down by a lot more than 1. The coach would always talk about getting back to a certain deficit by a certain time in the game, right? So if we were down by 10, can we get down by 5 with 3 minutes left in the quarter or something like that? So it feels like a lot more bite-sized chunk. And when you actually do that, you're actually gaining momentum, and you see the momentum that you're gaining such that you can get back to ultimately to a lead and to win. So I thought that was a really great analogy and a great story.
Yeah, I love that, Carter. Thanks for sharing that. Guys, one of my biggest takeaways from that sports study was this. So they studied the NBA and then they went into college games and studied college games. And here's what they found. Regardless of how much they were winning or losing by, right? Or losing by rather, the team that was losing, that was behind, and they looked at scoring patterns, they scored a disproportionate number of their points immediately after the halftime break. Got it? They scored a disproportionate number of points in the game immediately after that halftime break. That's why we need to sometimes stage midpoints, right? That was the point of the 5 ways to reawaken during a slump. We need to get to that midpoint. But here's the deal, guys. We're there. June is this temporal landmark for us. We're at the midpoint. So will you score a disproportionate number of points, number of appointments, right? Number of contracts immediately after the halftime break? Time is now, right? July 1st is that it's the start. I think we all have this phenomenal opportunity. And so as I took a step back and said, well, gosh, how do we do that? How do we do that? I was reminded of a conversation that we had as an organization probably almost to the day a year ago. And it was a conversation that I said, hey, I want to talk about not leaving the window open. Anyone remember that conversation? What does don't leave the window open mean? Who remembers? Don't leave the window open. Katie.
I remember you talking about this. This was a while ago. This was about like, okay, if you live in someplace super hot and you've got your air conditioning on, you wouldn't actually leave your windows open while you got the air conditioning on.
Yeah, exactly. So let me use an example just today, right? We have, gosh, I should know this. We have 40, 50, 60 agents in Austin, right? In just that one city. It's going to be 95 degrees in Austin today, right? 95 degrees in Austin. Now, maybe you're used to that, but if it was 95 degrees here, we'd probably have our air conditioning on. Yes? You probably have your air conditioning on too, Holly, right? Like, now, the air conditioning is gonna, yeah, Holly says it's on, right? What is the first thing you do before you turn on your AC?
Shut the windows.
Yeah, especially in this economy. You shut the windows. And why? Because if you don't, there's no point to turn on the AC. Fair? There's no point to turn on the AC if your windows are open. Now, I believe we run our businesses with the AC on and the windows open. What I mean by that is whether we're an individual agent, whether we are on a team, we are constantly lead generating. Yes, constantly. All of us are. We're jumping on our levers, right? We're out there executing. We're spending money on leads, right? We have leads flowing into our business every day. And we have the windows open. The leads are the AC. The windows, it's your follow-up, guys, right? Our leads are like AC in the summertime or heat in the wintertime. However, we only shut our windows if we're lead following up and we're lead converting. The problem with us as agents is we love AC. Like, we love AC. We just don't want to get out of our chair, go over to the window and shut the window or close the door. We're 100% on board for pumping the AC as an organization, right? Every one of our teams is prepared, has the budget, we're a profitable business as long as the windows are shut, right? As long as we seal up the building so that the cool air doesn't leak out. Like, I visualize this so clearly in my head as a business owner. Now, statistics show that lead conversion and lead follow-up takes time, right? It takes time. I wanted to share some statistics with you. I'm going to share a screen actually here in just a minute. This is a study that was done, gosh, and I'm going to go through some of these stats. Don't worry if you can't see it. We'll send this out, but this was a study done by HBR, Harvard Business Review, some time ago, like a long time ago. We've shared this, right? And actually, this study has been sort of looked at hundreds and hundreds of times. Salesforce, actually, right, an organization, right, that their purpose is to help conversion, has recently reevaluated the study and issued some facts around it. I want to break down inbound and outbound calls, right? Inbound that's lead response. These are leads that either have come into your business, maybe they're online leads, maybe they're calls. It doesn't matter, they're inbound. Here's what we have found, right? Studies have found that 35 to 50% of all sales, right? If you look at this study, it was a study done of thousands of companies across all industries. So this is a sales study, guys, and we're going to relate it to real estate as we go. But almost 50% of all sales go to the first responder. Now, do you believe that buyers only email you? Do you believe that sellers only click on your Facebook ad? Do you believe? The answer to that is no. If we want response, if we are looking for something, don't we reach out to multiple people? We do. Up to 50% of sales go to the first responder. So were you the first responder? Here's what else showed up in terms of response time, right? Response time. After 1 hour, here, let me scroll up so you can see this. Look at this graph, and I'll try to make this bigger for you guys. Look at this graph on response time on your screen. What happens after the first hour? The response rate from prospects drops like 8 times after the first hour. The difference between the number of responses, like pickups, conversations in the first hour to the number of responses in the second hour is a 450% difference, guys. So when your coach gets on you or your leader gets on you for response time, that's because we know you have a 450% like higher likelihood to have a conversation, and that's where conversion happens if you respond in the first hour. The best way to convert is pretty simple. Like punch in the number and talk on the phone, right? Get on, like respond to the email if you don't have the number within, like that's why our target is 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. Now, is that reality? Always no. You might be in an appointment. I get that. But we have systems in place to respond. I'm going to scroll out and then I'll scroll back in. When we're making outbound calls, right? There's this thought that that calling is dead. Well, it's not. It isn't. Persistence and perseverance seems to be dying in our industry, but calling isn't dead. Over 30% of leads were never followed up with in their study, right? When they looked across all these industries, right? Overall, those how many calls did they study again? 13,750 call attempts. They studied 1,000 different companies, and 30% of their leads were just never followed back up with after the first initial connection. 44% of real estate agents give up on a lead after the first call. Yeah, 44% of us. Think about that. Go down on this graph and I'll show you that persistence, right? Persistence. What happens? The more calls you make, second attempt, third attempt, fourth attempt, fifth attempt, right? Studies show that 6 attempts need to be made. But then you look at the average call attempts for sales reps. 40% of sales reps make 1 call, right? 30% of sales reps make 2 calls. Less than 10% of sales reps make 3 calls. See, I think those are awesome numbers. I'm not proud of those numbers, but I think they're awesome for our organization. Why? Because that's our competitive advantage. That's our competitive advantage. By making a few more attempts, sales reps can increase their conversion rate by 70%. I don't know about you, but I think a conversion ratio increase of 70% for our organization would change our world. How do we do that? Make 5 more call attempts than you've made. That's it. That's it. It's super simple. Sales is simple. Right? It's incredibly simple. Persistence isn't easy though, is it? Right? Consistency isn't easy though, is it? Statistically speaking, they study time as well. And I don't want people to get hung up on this study with time because when's the best time to make a phone call? Anytime. Like that's the real answer to that. But statistically, I'm gonna share two periods of time. The 2 best pickup times were from 11 a.m. to 12, right? 11 to 12, and then 4 to 5. So ask yourself, are you wasting that 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. slot? If that is one of the best hours in the day for pickups, well, why not schedule lead follow-up, right? Lead gen's in the morning, we know that, right? You knock it out. But why not schedule lead follow-up from 4 to 5 every day, 4 to 5? Imagine 5 hours a week in the highest pickup rate time of the day, conversion goes up. Conversion goes up. Interestingly enough, they also shared some data around email. And the best time to send an email, if we're going to do email follow-up, is between that 8 to 9 hours. So maybe you're scripting from 8 to 8:30. Maybe you're standing up from 8:30 to 9. Maybe take 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes in that hour and send out some emails. Or write those emails and have it scheduled to go out. Why? Because people are getting into their email and they're knocking off responses between 8 to 9 and noon to 1. So why not do it on your lunch break? Noon to 1. Why? Because at 1 o'clock they come back and check their email. Just being strategic around our time is super, super critical, guys. Super critical. A couple other things I wanted to share from this study of Salesforce, from Salesforce. In fact, actually, Stuart Lung, who's the CEO of Salesforce, said this. He said, a phone call will get someone's attention much quicker than an email. Guys, his whole system is based on email. And yet he's telling you, right? He's telling us that a phone call will get someone's attention much quicker than an email. But if we're not careful, what happens? Oh man, we hide behind email, don't we? Right? Email is necessary. Those systems are necessary. But a phone call will get someone's attention much quicker than an email. And I don't know about you, but that's what lead gen and lead follow-up is, getting someone's attention. Getting someone's attention. So I'm gonna just go through a few more points that came out from the Salesforce study. Number one, 50% of sales will go to the first person who makes contact, right? And the agent that makes 6 follow-up contacts has a 90% higher chance of getting a response and converting that online lead. 6, right? Number 2, right? Remember, best time to make contact via email between 8 and 9 and 12 and 1. Best time to make contact via phone, 11 and 12 and 4 and 5. 11 and 12 and 4 and 5. Here's another interesting stat for those of you that have been doing this a long time. Back in 2007, they said it would take about 3.6 calls until you got a prospect. Today, 9 calls to a cold lead to get a prospect. So you think, well, gosh, cold calling doesn't work. I made my 3 calls. Well, you need to get out of 2007. 9 cold call attempts to find a prospect. The average real estate agent only makes 2 attempts. 45% of real estate agents only make 1 attempt. That is your competitive advantage, guys. That is your competitive advantage. Another statistic, 91% of our current and past customers say they would give you a referral. You know how many agents ask? 11%. 91% said they would give you, 11% actually asked for it. And then this is an interesting number, and this is based on our lack of follow-up. Every single year, statistics show that real estate agents lose 14% of their business. 14% of their business is lost. How do we know that? Well, NAR, right? NAR goes out and says, well, did you use the agent that you used last time? And on average, 14% of your customers you lose every single year. The biggest reason? Not keeping in touch. Guys, we need to shut the windows. We need to, right now, as we're at that midpoint of the year, it's a phenomenal time to double down on lead follow-up, right? Double down on that conversion. And it comes, truly, it comes from setting time in our calendar to do your lead gen and setting time in your calendar to do lead follow-up. Those are 2 very, very different things. And be careful that we don't have the AC pumping or the heat on and your windows and doors open. Ahas or takeaways. Does it cause us to think about our schedule? Does it cause us to think about getting out from behind our email and picking up the phone? Guys, at the end of the day, it's those that are on the phone the most. I bet if we did a study across our organization and everybody had to show me their phone usage, and it shows how much time you're on your phone, like take a look. Like phone use, the actual phone itself, that usage is way down across the country. We are not on our phones as much voice to voice. We're on our phones, just not voice to voice. So look, how much of the day are you literally on your phone making voice-to-voice contact? Anyone want to share any takeaways or maybe adjustments that they need to make in their schedule as they listen to those statistics? Katie.
I was just thinking, right, be the last man standing. If it's 6 attempts and you win, just be, and like most agents don't even make the second follow-up call. That's with FSBOs, that's with expireds, that's with internet lead follow-up. Then just be the one that does, and you increase your opportunity by a huge amount.
Yeah, guys, as you think about that, just look at your screen for a second. Right? Look at the chance of making contact. Isn't that what we're all after? That's what we want. We want the opportunity to make contact. And look at the percentage. Look at your chance. Like your success rate goes up what? Every time, every call you make, your success rate goes up. And you're like, oh my gosh, yeah, that makes perfect sense. But then look at the average calls by sales reps across all industries, right? It goes down, right? By 1, 2, 3. It is the only difference between you and the top agent in your marketplace. We like to convince ourselves, well, it's because that agent has this, or that agent does this, or that agent has this value proposition, or hey, they're cutting their commission, but the fact is 6 calls. No one will beat you if you make the calls. Fair? Any other thoughts before we shift gears? All right, so let's talk about time. I said we would talk about time management. Many of you have gone through our master time session. And in that session, I shared some research done by Laura Vanderkam, right? She does a phenomenal TED Talk on time. She wrote a book called 168 Hours. She wrote another book, which I love, called What the Most Successful People Do Before Breakfast. She has a podcast with a very similar topic, or with a very similar name. But she said this recently. I shared this with some of our leadership this week. She said, we often say, gosh, I just don't have enough time in the day, right? I don't have enough hours in my day. And the fact is it's probably true. It's probably true. We don't have enough hours in the day based on what we want to accomplish in that day. And here's the problem with that. If we keep on telling ourselves that, we will lose touch or lose the reality that there's always enough time in the week, right? We take people through that exercise of 168 hours, right? We all have that 168 hours in the week. And the fact is we have tons of extra time in 168 hours. There is nothing that we can't accomplish in 168 hours. But we get stuck on this expression 24/7, 24/7, 24/7. And that's all we think about, 24 instead of the 168. As it turns out, things that we do, Laura says, don't have to happen daily. Things that we do probably have to happen weekly, right? We have to get in our weekly lead gen. We have to get in our weekly lead follow-up. But the fact is don't stress yourself out if something comes up in a day and you get behind, right? We've gone through a session just a couple of weeks ago. What are the simple things we can do to win the day? But interestingly enough, the goal of winning the day is because ultimately we want to win the week, right? Win the week. We use that expression a lot. Peter Drucker, who I quoted last week, right? One of the best business writers of all time, says that what is measured is managed. So some of us are struggling with some time management. Wait, what did Peter say? What is measured is managed. So are you measuring your time? If you have this idea that you are poor at time management, then you need to measure your time. You need to measure your time. So Laura says, here's how I do this. I measure my time in 30-minute increments. Now, I had a coach that had me do this, and I thought it was obsessive, to be honest, right? I'm just being real. I thought, gosh, like I'm spending more time measuring my time every 30 minutes than I'm saving. The fact is here's how she tactically does this. Here's how she tactically does this. She said, I don't go in every 30 minutes and write down what I did. She said, I do it 4 times a day. I do it 4 times a day. So 4 times a day, I will go back and say, okay, over the last couple hours, what did I accomplish in those 30-minute increments? And here's what she found. What she measures is managed. She manages her time better when she's measuring those 30-minute increments, those 30-minute blocks. Jolene, you say, gosh, this word busy, right? This word busy. Here's what she says. She says, gosh, people just use that word busy as a badge of honor, right? In fact, she said, when I ask people like, hey, how are you? Their response is, oh, I'm busy. Good busy, right? But I'm busy. And then we sort of get our self-worth or our self-importance based on how busy we are. Why do we do that? Well, because we assume that if people want our time, well, it's valuable, and that's where self-worth comes in. But the fact is, she said, we have to be careful. We have to be careful because good time management will lead to us not being busy all the time. Last thing she shared, and because of who we are, I wanted to share this too. She said what she learned was leaning into moments that matter is incredibly profound, right? So time management, what is measured is managed. All of us can probably do a little bit better, right? Me too, measuring and managing our time. But what's the purpose? The purpose isn't just to get more done. The purpose isn't just to be busier. So she had this conversation recently that I listened to, and she said, time is passing at the same rate regardless of what we do. And yet, isn't time experienced very differently? Right? Like, think about it. Aren't some things like dreadfully slow? They seem to go on forever. Anyone, well, very few of us have been stuck in traffic lately, but if you're stuck in traffic, doesn't it feel like dreadfully slow? Right? Or maybe a boring meeting, hopefully not this one, but doesn't it feel like, oh my gosh, this meeting is going on forever. This is super slow. Time speeds up or is experienced at different rates, yes? Now imagine you're having dinner with friends, right? Or a group that you just love to hang out. How fast does that dinner go? You might show up to someone's house at 5 or 6 p.m. and before you know it, it's midnight, right? 5 or 6 hours goes by. Did it feel like a 5 or 6 hour meeting? Can you imagine if this was 5 hours? How would it feel? Dreadfully, dreadfully long. Yet dinner with friends feels different. Why? Well, she says it raises the question, can we make good moments seem to pass as slowly as boring moments? And she says the answer to that is probably no, but here's what we can do to stretch out good moments and experience them. And I love this. I wanted to share these 3 things that we can do. Number 1, plan ahead of time. Interestingly enough, psychologists have found that anticipation is a key part of our experiencing pleasure later. Think about that, right? Planning out good moments is critically important. Now, that's tough for me. Like, you know, I've shared with some of you as my wife loves to talk about vacations for months and months and months in advance. And I'm just the guy that says, hey, like, it's Friday, let's book a trip. However, that's not incredibly experiential, is it? If we're going to take these good moments and make them last and feel like they are drawn out and feel like those good experiential moments are experienced over long periods of time, number 1, plan them ahead. Anticipation is a key part of our experience with pleasure. Number 2, be present in the moment itself. Like, while you're going through it, talk about enjoying it. And do something that will commemorate the experience. Some of us take pictures, right? In our group, that's Karen. Karen loves to commemorate the moment, right? But interestingly enough, and I'm not the photo guy, like, I don't like photos. However, think about that. Be present in the moment. She's being present in the moment when she says, guys, let's get together, let's take a picture, let's commemorate this. That's why people buy concert t-shirts, is what Laura says, right? And number 3, do you think about and share your memories to cement them? Having concrete or more vivid memories helps us feel that like we have more time. Isn't that interesting? I shared this quote. Laura said that Kurt Vonnegut used to say that his uncle, right? His uncle would often interrupt situations. Maybe they were just sitting on the front porch, right, having a cup of coffee or having a drink, and his uncle would stop in mid sentence and say this. He would say, "If this isn't nice, what is? If this isn't nice, what is?" And what is that doing? It's actually just acknowledging the fact that you're happy. It's acknowledging the fact that this is a cool experience, even in the small, mundane, regular experiences. And here's the deal. Why are we talking about this? Because it is part of managing our time. It is slowing down what we enjoy. Laura says it's a positive way to remind ourselves that life is good right now. And I think all of us probably need that right about now. Yes? Like, it reminds ourselves that I am not unhappy, right? This isn't nice, what is, right? It reminds ourselves that we are not unhappy. Ever find yourself like, why am I anxious? There's no reason to be anxious. I think things are okay, right? A double negative helps us experience the moment. I am not unhappy, right? Call attention to the lack of anything being wrong. Isn't that interesting? Right? Laura Vanderkam is one of my favorites around time. And I think as we learn lessons about time, how to experience time, how to manage time, how to measure time, we can use that tactically for business to be more efficient, but we could use that in life to be more experiential, Any thoughts around that? What does that conversation make you think of? Where might we be able to use that, do you think? Who wants to share? Go ahead and raise your hand. We're a quiet group this morning. Katie, I can always count on you. I appreciate it.
So, it reminds me of one of the things that Ben said on a team leader meeting where, right, we've all been kind of stuck inside, or most of us anyways, and he went out to dinner and he was like, it was such a nice experience. And it kind of reminds me of what you're saying around the commemoration of it and really like enjoying that space at a higher level. And yet too often our language just doesn't necessarily support what we're looking to accomplish, hence like the busy versus productive piece. And I just think that in watching the words that we use, because understanding that creates our reality, and what are we saying over and over and over, because the subconscious is always listening and it will create exactly what you believe. Life rises up to support whatever your belief is. So it kind of almost starts internal and looking at what words am I using to describe whatever the situation is, my productivity, my ability to succeed.
Yeah, I love that. Holly, and then I'll add something, Katie.
Well, Katie said it much more eloquently, but the thought that went through my mind is we're always thinking about the next thing. So maybe even on vacation, maybe you're sailing and you're thinking, oh, but when we get back, we have a super fancy dinner. Oh, okay, but when we finish dinner, then we're going to go on the sunset cruise or whatever it is, but always thinking about the next thing and not relishing where we are.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to that as well. Alexandra.
Yeah, so gratitude is a complete mindset. And there's a lot to be said about the law of attraction and what you focus on, that means more to you. So if you're focusing on the good and enjoying the moments, then you'll end up living a happier life overall.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think that is, what you said, Holly, is sort of the point of that second half of this time discussion with Laura, that if we're always thinking about what's next, then we're not actually experiencing where we are. And that means with clients, that means with family, that means like we really are that human race that's always looking, especially if you're growth driven, like we're always like, well, what are we doing after this? What are we doing after this? What are we doing after this? Like that does drive me crazy, especially kids, right? When kids are like, well, we'll be eating dinner. Well, what are we having for breakfast? And it's like, but think back to that one little statement, right? We can begin to change that rhythm in our mind. Kurt Vonnegut's uncle, right? If this isn't nice, what is? If this isn't nice, what is? I think it's a really important piece, especially because we're a mission-based organization, that our goal for everybody is to not just have big businesses, but right, to live experientially. We do not do that. It is impossible to do that. We will never execute on that if we don't manage time, right? If we don't manage time. So I have one more conversation to have with us, and this is related to stress. Is stress normal? Will we all experience it? Is stress healthy? Is stress necessary? Like, yes, 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 yes. Like, all those questions are yeses. So how do we deal with it then? How do we deal with it in a healthy way? Guys, there's probably no one better, right? I mean, arguably in history, of learning to deal with stress than Marcus Aurelius. Aurelius was the emperor of Rome, right? From 161 to 180, almost 20 years as the most powerful ruler in the world at that time, right? And at that time, it was a distant second, right? Like he had literally the way that the world was governed and shaped at that time in 161 to 180, right? Understand, the weight of the world was on his shoulders. He ran the largest empire. He had, and going into his history and really understanding who he was as a person teaches us some valuable lessons. He ran one of the largest empires, clearly, right? Weight of the world on his shoulders. He had a troubled son, right? Some of us, right, deal with things with our kids, right? Whether it's health, whether it's emotional, whether it's just kids getting into trouble. Well, he did too. He did too. He had a health condition, right? History shows that he had a nagging stomach issue that created great unrest and great pain that he was constantly dealing with. There was a palace coup, right, by one of his closest friends. Think about that. Think about the stress from a governmental perspective as well as just the friend perspective. There were rumors that his wife was being unfaithful while he was ruling. The Parthians invaded his empire, which led to a 5-year war in that 19-year period. The Antonine Plague struck in 165, 4 years after he started ruling, and killed over 10 million people around the world, guys. The Tiber River flooded, right? One of the worst floods in the history of Europe, leaving most of Rome in famine. Guys, did he deal with stress? I don't know about you, but none of us probably have all of that going on. We have our own stress. And yet he conquered all of that stress. He is known as one of the chillest, right? That's my word, but one of the chillest guys ever. This is what he said in one of his writings. He said, today, and I quote, "Today I escaped my anxiety, or no, I discarded it, because it was within me in my own perceptions, not outside." I'm going to say that again. Today I escaped, and this is in his writings, right? His notebooks have been published. Today I escaped my anxiety, or no, I discarded it, because it was within me in my own perceptions, not outside. So how do we conquer stress? We follow his model. He wrote in his journal every day. That was his model. He wrote about his difficulties in advance. He wrote about what was going to be a challenge. He wrote about what his difficulties were going to be in the future. And he reminded himself that things were not going to go perfectly. He reminded himself that getting angry never made things better. Like, he literally wrote this to himself. So what is not going to go right? Write about it, right? What isn't going to go perfect? Well, everything. So write about it. Also, he always tried to gain perspective. He said he would zoom way out, and he kept in mind his own insignificance, right? He zoomed way out and realized that there's very little I can control here. There's very little I can do here. I am very unimportant at the end of the day. And yet he also knew how to zoom way, way in and he reminded himself to return to what? The present moment. So if you follow his history, it gets reduced down to one thing. To reduce stress, he separated the essential from the inessential. He was a master at that. And he recognized that stress or anxiety, right? It was internal, right? It was internal. It wasn't external. Again, his name, if you want to look him up, I mean, he's probably he is the most well-known Stoic philosophers, but happened to be, he was the emperor of Rome as well, 161 to 180. All right, guys, that's what we got. Thanks for hanging in there with me today. We covered a lot of ground. Remember, we're at a midpoint, right? Think about it. The science of perfect timing. Think about what midpoints do. Think about those studies, right? The studies that we went through, the sports analysis, the cutting those shapes, right? Do not start getting messy with your scissors, right? And the apes and their level of happiness. Think about the 5 ways we can reawaken our motivation. Don't leave the window open. It's time for lead follow-up, guys, right? Sit down as a team and recommit to lead follow-up. Sit down as an individual. Sit down and recommit to Power Hour, right? And that lead gen and lead follow-up. Don't leave the window open. And remember, time, right? What is measured is managed. All of us can manage our time better, both for our business and for our personal world, to make sure that we're being experiential. All right, guys, that's it. Thanks for your time. If you need me, you know where I am. Have an awesome week.